Before we begin, just a quick thing. I've got a website where I do reviews, I've got a gaming channel, and I'm also an author. My book's on Amazon, links in the description. Thanks a lot, let's begin.
Just hours away from the ordinary, there's a place where anything goes. Where the excitement never ends, and the party never dies. And the party never dies. And the party never dies. Never dies. Never dies. Never dies.
Three years go by and it's time for another film. Towards the end of the last video I mentioned that from Apocalypse onwards, the films did their best to emulate the games, but afterwards, I had a thought. Whilst the influence of the games started swamping the films after Apocalypse, the plot of Extinction does its best to differ from the games. After Raccoon City is devastated by a nuclear bomb at the end of Resident Evil 3, Umbrella was blamed for the viral outbreak and collapsed, leaving the game universe open for near enough a fresh start with Resident Evil 4. On the flip side, in the time between Apocalypse and Extinction, the world is now completely fucked. The T-virus went beyond Raccoon City and infected the world within months. Now zombies have taken over the earth, and what survivors are left are forced to live on the run. First things first, who's back? Oded Fehr and Mike Epps return as Carlos and LJ, and naturally Mila Jovovich is back as Alice, or more specifically, Alice is, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Ian Glenn is back as Dr. Isaacs, and his role is more prominent than before. So what's new? Well, Extinction has taken it upon itself to add another character from the games. Enter Ali Larter as Claire Redfield. For comparison, let's have a look at Claire from the games.
Thank you.
Claire Redfield, sister of Resident Evil 1's main protagonist, Chris Redfield, first appeared in Resident Evil 2. Personality-wise, she's really quite sweet and maternal when it comes to children. With Sherry in Resident Evil 2 and Ronnie in Resident Evil Degeneration, she's quick to protect the young ones because no one else will. In contrast, Film Claire's personality is much more battle-hardened. She's the leader of the convoy of survivors and she's responsible for their safety, a challenge that she takes very seriously. She's still the protector and she can fight just as good as her video game counterparts. The only thing she lacks is the same playfulness that video game Claire had.
We really gotta stop meeting like this.
However, in this very specific context, I'm feeling generous and I'll say that this more serious attitude is necessary for someone keeping a bunch of people at the end of the world safe. Another aspect from the games carried forth is the inclusion of the defenseless innocents. In Apocalypse it was Angie, and in Extinction the role of protectee goes to Kay Mart, played by Spencer Locke. Her role is to run and scream and only defend herself when absolutely necessary. But what happened in between Apocalypse and Extinction? There's a brief mention of the happenings in a conversation between Carlos and Alice, where Alice became aware that Umbrella was tracking her, and so she left the group to keep them safe. Also, no Angie. This is the beginning of a running trend in Resident Evil films. Characters will be established and then disappear off the face of the earth with no explanation as to where they are or what happened to them. At least the novels attempt to establish some kind of continuity, and so to anyone brave enough to read them, they would have read the part where Alice killed Angie whilst being controlled by Umbrella, presumably as we see them control her in the film. Although in the film, all they made her do was stand still and hope that one of the infected would kill her, when I assume they could have just ordered her to kill herself, and then they wouldn't have had to bother making super zombies, but then that would have prevented them from nicking something else from the games. By now, Resident Evil 4 had come out, and normal, ordinary zombies are so boring in yesterday, so here are some super fast, ultra quick zombies to spice things up a bit. plus the dogs. Any other characters aren't really worth mentioning, they're all boring situational characters that are all dead by the end anyway. I'm a little bit hard pressed to find something good to talk about because all I think of are the ways Extinction fucks up. I like what they did with Alice's abilities. They're actually trying to give her a little bit of character now as we see her wandering the wasteland and trying to battle with her own uncontrolled telekinesis. She uses her telekinesis to save Carlos and it's shown to be physically taxing for her, hence the reason why she sticks to hand combat during the battle in Vegas. Her fighting style remains unchanged, it doesn't look enhanced at all. From what I can see, all that's new is her telekinesis. Once again, the sets look great. Some effort has gone into looking like some drama has taken place and it's woven into the story, which is good. If the films do have a strength, it's that each one has its own unique look, and I would say that Extinction definitely stands out as the sandy one. Before we get into the disastrous decision that tarnished the rest of the franchise, we'll start with the treatment of existing characters. Apart from Alice, the only two protagonists returning from Apocalypse is Carlos and LJ. Enjoy them while you can because they'll both be dead by the end. LJ is bitten early in the film and during the battle in Vegas he dies and turns into a zombie. Before he can bite Kmart, Carlos intervenes and is bitten by LJ before he's put down. Knowing his time is up, Carlos sacrifices himself to allow the survivors a chance to get into an alleged safe zone and ultimately for Alice to confront her greatest challenge. Basically that's just pissed off at least one fan base. Carlos was one of the characters from the games and they did their best to implement him, and I was thinking that he would be essential for the rest of the series. However, it turns out he was only in this film just to be killed off. As for LJ, from what I've read, LJ was meant to have a larger part. He was originally scripted to activate the laser grid to destroy the Tyrant at the end. At the start of the film, Alice is shown waking up in the mansion, dodging the laser grid and finally being killed by a bouncing mine. Her body is shown being carried to the surface and dumped in a ditch along with dozens of other dead Alices. That's right, they did it. They brought in clones. Bringing in clones basically means that nothing has any weight now. There's no danger. You think you're gonna miss Carlos? Don't worry, because in 2 movies he'll be brought back as a fucking clone. I've decided that even though I'm fully aware there is still one major twist when it comes to Alice's origins that is revealed in the final film, I'll talk about it when we get there, but for now, let me just chuck this into the pot. It's so clear that after the helicopter crash at the end of Apocalypse, Alice is very, very dead. So why was the possibility of her being a clone not suggested earlier? Because it hadn't been thought of? Maybe. Nevertheless, Alice's brief stay in the Detroit facility will have given Dr. Isaacs a chance to collect what he needed to create the clones. He's putting them through the test so he can use their blood to create a serum that will hopefully domesticate the zombies, removing their need to eat flesh, and the Umbrella executives can leave their underground hidey holes before the food runs out. They will be disappointed when they get to the surface because it looks like the food is gone anyway. Isaacs is bitten by a super zombie and so overdoses himself on the antivirus to try and counteract the infection. This results in Isaacs mutating into the ultimate monstrosity from the original game, the Tyrant. Meanwhile, Alice has arrived at the Umbrella facility after their failed assassination attempt. She sends Claire and the remaining survivors away in a helicopter for Arcadia, but the sight of all the dead clones is a step too far. Inside the facility, all she finds is blood and death and horror, courtesy of Isaacs, but one thing she does find is the White Queen, sister computer to the Red Queen from the first film. Get ready, because this is one of the reasons why I'm so upset with this film.
You mean my blood is the cure for all this?
Correct.
Let's listen to that again.
You mean my blood is the cure for all this?
Correct.
You mean this could all end?
Correct.
This is the first that we're hearing of a possible cure, and it will be the last time until the final film. Afterlife and Retribution don't mention this pretty important plot point, and one might think that it's because it clearly shows an end in sight. The fact that Claire was seen taking the remaining survivors to a potential safe area also shows that the series could have been nearing its end. Maybe one more film could have rounded things off nicely, but no. Another 3 films followed this. One thing that does feature in Afterlife, Retribution, and indeed the final chapter is clones. Although the budget was around the same as Apocalypse with $45 million, Extinction saw an increase in box office revenue with $150 million compared to Apocalypse's $130 million. The reviews, however, were far worse. Although the cinematography, the sets and the action sequences were praised, the script and story was heavily bashed, with most calling it a succession of set pieces rather than an actual film, and an ending that didn't really end the film but set up the next film, which is actually a running trend with all the films. So why did Extinction do so well? I can agree that the Resident Evil team know how to do their action sequences. The battle in Vegas was good, and Alice fighting the dogs at the start was a good way to reintroduce her and showcase her new / already existing abilities. It's just all the other stuff that slaps me in the feelings. There are still 3 more films to go, and Resident Evil has already pulled the end of the world card. Whilst I do think that Afterlife does a lot to pick up after Extinction, there's still a lot of faff to go.